Welcome everyone, and many thanks for taking the time to attend our session this morning. It's hosted by PAM Insight and SIX. We're going to be looking at how data is going to be the driver of innovation in wealth management in the coming years, and how, as this innovation increases, there might be an argument for a chief data officer role within wealth management firms. I'm Alex Newlove. I edit the Wealth Net, which is PAM Insight's daily news service focused on the wealth management sector. I'm going to be chairing the discussion this morning. There will be time for Q&A, so please do submit your questions using the box at the bottom as we go along. Before we kick off, I'm going to hand over to my panelists to introduce themselves. Dan, would you be able to kick us off, please?
Yeah, very pleased to be here, and thanks for inviting me to speak. So I'm Daniel Dagg. I'm the Dan Dagg. I'm the COO for Arbuthnot Latham & Co, where I've been for nearly 5 years now. Looking forward to coming and talking about the issue of data, which I find hugely important in the business.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. Paul.
Yes, good morning, Alex. Good morning, all. So I'm Paul McCafferty, the private banking COO for EFG. In simple terms, the COO for the front office. Been with EFG for just over 3 years. Previously stints at Julius Baer, Barclays Wealth, and running an offshore IFA in Asia. So I've been in the industry about 25 years. This topic is similar to Dan. It's particularly of interest to me because I believe there's a real opportunity at the moment to get this right by blending the commercial and compliance approach to supporting our clients and growing our businesses.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. And finally, Roy, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody, and welcome. So I want to do a quick introduction to in the top corner it says in association with SIX. So some of you may know SIX, some of you may not know SIX. SIX is a financial markets infrastructure provider. Predominantly, we're known for running the Swiss Stock Exchange. We also run security services and custody services within Switzerland. And for the last year, we've done the same thing within Spain with our acquisition of the BME, Spanish Stock Exchange Group. I actually work for a part of the business called SIX Financial Information, and we're an information business, a global information business. And specifically why are we here today? We're here because we have recently launched a data service for UK wealth managers that brings together corporate actions, price data, reference data, and tax data into one easily accessible data set. And PAM asked me to come and speak because we have a wide customer base around Europe of wealth managers, predominantly in Switzerland, Benelux, and France, and to share some of the things that those guys are doing that maybe you're already doing in the UK or maybe you're thinking about. So really to share our experiences. So over to you, Alex, to kick off.
Great, thanks, Roy. So we obviously know that wealth managers already capture huge amounts of data on basically the UK's richest families via their KYC processes and so forth. But to start, I'm curious to hear, where the panel thinks the sector is at compared to others in terms of harnessing this client data to improve efficiency and strategy. Paul, would you mind kicking us off on that?
Sure, no problem, Alex. So I think we can say across our sector, there are probably some huge variances there. And I suspect it probably depends on the size and the maturity of the firm and their approach to digital strategy as well. This is purely based on instinct, but I would expect that the larger and more digitally savvy firms have progressed further here around harnessing that data to support their business strategy. And smaller legacy firms, and I include my own firm in this, we've got a lot of way to go here. We've got room to improve. There are swathes of data, as you say, but are we harnessing it in a way that's right for the business and right for our clients? I think we've got a long way to go there. And I think we can take some learns from other industries as well. So looking outside of wealth management, how are other sectors using that data, that client data, for good or for bad? There are lots of painful lessons being learned out in the field, and how can we learn from those and follow the right path here?
Great, thanks. Dan.
Yeah, I mean, similar. One of the things that we've spoken about before, Alex, is this is moving all the time. The idea that data is being used to drive both operationally around security for clients around transaction monitoring and all that kind of stuff, as well as the fact that people are building their propositions on the back of data, is a massive area. It's an evolving area within the bank, and one of the things is that everybody. I think that the job of data is a job of everybody. I know we're going to talk later about it being the role of a data officer, but certainly there is a position where everybody's got to be mindful of the challenge around managing data.
Thanks. Roy, how about you? What are you sort of seeing when you're out and about speaking to wealth managers?
I think what we see in it, when we spoke for the first time on Monday, myself and the two guys, I think that, to echo Paul's point, there's probably two types of organisation at the moment. There's the one that has just got regulation under control and compliance under control. We talked about investor protection, transaction reporting around MiFID II. So there's lots of firms that are at that stage that they've now got things under control. But there's two or three, there's a small percentage that are looking at, instead of being under control in data, how do we use data in a different way? How do we drive the business? So I don't think everybody's there. I think, to Paul's point, there are a few leaders in the market, and what they're doing differently is looking at their internal data and seeing how they can drive business growth either now or in the future. So I think there's a mixed bag.
That's interesting. And Dan, sort of picking up on that, moving away from the control aspect and more into, I guess, the strategy, the business development piece. Is there anyone at your firm who is sort of thinking about that, or how are you thinking about that at the moment?
We're, like a lot of firms, probably of a similar size to us. I mean, we're on a journey with this. We have, in the recent years, we've invested in a CRM platform that goes across the whole business, and that gives you real insight around the clients you've got, the clients you're serving, and obviously we're trying to grow our digital strategy. I think that it is a big challenge to get competitive advantage, because there are some wealth managers are largely more traditional in the services we offer, and we're very much reliant on people and the quality of our investment managers, our advisors, and everything else. Whereas there are new entrants to the market, fintech firms and what have you, who are probably they probably built from ground up the capability to build an organisation which is going to take more advantage from building a digital proposition that people will get involved in, and therefore use data more effectively. I actually think, though, that the hybrid firms who can effectively understand the value of the data that they've got, but also have that personal relationship, I think that there's a really important place for that, particularly in the wealth management sector.
Paul, how about at EFG? I know you said you're sort of at the start of the journey, as it were, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, like such similar shifts in other areas across our business, quite often this progression is led by the regulatory imperative, and that's certainly what I've seen over the last couple of years. It's been MiFID II initially, requirements there, and then into GDPR in particular. How do we ensure that we are dealing with our data in a regulatory compliant way? But you move beyond that and say, right, once we've dealt with the regulatory imperative, what's the business imperative? And we're now at that stage of saying, how can we harness this and unleash this to help us meet our business objectives? But it's absolutely critical that we are able to blend that business imperative with actually what do our clients want, need, and require from us, as opposed to us making some broad-based assumptions. So right now we're at that stage of evolution around how do we bring the relevant parties around the table to be right with the regulation, right with the business strategy, and right for our clients. So formative stages, but it's bringing those elements together that I think is critical for us at this stage in the revolution.
And obviously our sort of title for this was around this chief data officer role. And I'm curious to hear how, you see such a role fitting in with the sort of existing senior management and C-suite. We've got two COOs on the call, so it'd be interesting to hear from you as well. But Roy, do you want to kick us off on that in terms of how it fits into the existing C-suite?
Yeah, so I'll let the guys answer whether they think it sits in the C-suite in the UK or not. But I think again, in our earlier discussion, we said there are certain things. If you go and look at the job role of Chief Data Officer, yeah, it starts with governance and reporting, right? You can, within your own firms, you can probably tick those off. You've probably got someone who does that and does a good job of governance and reporting. But then you've got the question mark, what do you do with that analytics? Who does look after analytics? The analytics of the customer data, the transaction data, who brings it together? Is somebody doing that? If not, where should they sit? And then really the big question the Chief Data Officer answers is, how do you use that data as an asset? So how do you drive that business strategy? So have you got somebody at a high enough level to do that cross-functional role of pulling all of the data together, looking at business strategy and informing everybody based on really good analytics of the data and a view on the strategy and the way you want to move forward as a firm? Whether you do that at C level or just below is, is up to the individual firm. But I think those are the topics that you need to address somehow.
Dan, how would you see this potential role like sitting alongside your role as COO?
I think it's a really interesting one. I guess you need to decide what value it's going to add. I mean, several people have said on this call, I mean, there's definitely the kind of foundation level of, you've got to keep your data safe and secure. That's a minimum requirement. You've got to comply with GDPR. You've got to meet all the ICO expectations around how you look after data and the processes that you have in place for compliance with the GDPR principles. And I'll be honest with you, I see quite a lot of that sitting within the role of the COO. It's certainly something that I spend quite a lot of time worrying about. We've appointed a data privacy manager. We have an information security manager. So all of that bit is there. We then have the people who look after the kind of the data quality aspects. And that was a role that we created much as we built out our CRM capability. It was clear that all of our client data would sit under the umbrella of CRM, and therefore we set up a data governance forum, which was much more concerned about data quality. But then I think the real value of a chief data officer, and whether or not that's a C-suite role or not, is in client understanding. And if you forget all of the compliance aspects, all of the data quality aspects and what have you, and then say, well, okay, we've got all of this valuable commodity, which is our client's data, what are we going to do with it? That requires a particular skill set. Now, whether or not people would say, well, that sits with marketing, or it sits with the head of front office, or whether or not it's a specific chief data officer role, I think remains to be seen. But I think that it's how you use data to drive your proposition is a real value add. I'm not saying the other bits aren't important, but they tend to be more around compliance. I could see, a head of proposition or a chief data officer, or even a head of front office having to be really clued into it. I think the challenge is, it's looking for the skills, those skills of somebody who understands business strategy, but also understands how to use data to further that. That's even before you get into, the technologies that can help inform and build your proposition.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, similar to Dan in terms of, right now this sits with us, it sits within the COO area. And my question to myself is, am I giving this due credit? Am I giving this enough time to manage and manage this effectively and drive it forward? And that's the real danger. If we don't give this sufficient time or resource, then either something goes wrong or you just don't harness the power of it. There's a real opportunity. Dan used the phrase, seeing data as an asset, and I think that's the mindset shift that we want to go through and take our teams through as well. When we start viewing our client data as a valuable asset to the business, we start to understand it, protect it, use it more effectively, but put the relevant controls in place as well to make sure that we are protecting it as we do our clients' actual assets. So that's the mindset shift that we want to take our people through here. The question around would it be a C-suite role or not, I think Roy's right. Depends on the firm. It depends on that stage of maturity or evolution on this journey. But if you look at as firms evolve, and we've got a DPO in place, if you've got a CTO and a chief digital officer, you're putting someone in place to oversee the systems and the infrastructure. It's then taking that same approach on the client data. And I think to Dan's point around having that marketing understanding, or in my mind, it's someone who has a foot in first line and second line and has a good ability to manage and support towards the business objectives and the client objectives, while doing so in an operationally effective way and a compliant way. So it's quite an intriguing and quite a unique skill set, and because you are looking for a real blend of the commercial acumen and that compliance focus, so that we're doing things in the right way. So I do think it depends on the maturity of the organization, but has to be an area of continued and growing focus going forward.
Mm. And Roy, you'd had some interesting thoughts earlier about, the sort of relationship between a risk manager and a potential CDO, and how they might sort of see things differently. I was just wondering if you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so what I said was, I think that the guys have echoed it there, that the chief data officer or whoever is doing that role will look at things in a different way. The way that a chief risk officer or a risk officer looks at data is he looks at what he cannot do with the data. Yeah. So he looks at GDPR and he says, we can't do this, we can't do it. So he gets his red pen out and he does all of the things you cannot do, right? He doesn't look at it in the context of what can I do? What can I do with this customer information? I've been thinking about this since we first chatted on Monday. I thought I'd give an example. And the example comes out of I was watching the news yesterday, and it said that there are 5.5 million EU citizens now living in the UK, right? A massive number. Now, they're EU citizens. English is their second language, right? How many of them have ticked one of your boxes that said they speak French or speak German, right? How many services could you offer to that 5.5 million just by looking at the data and saying, well, why don't we have some marketing documentation in a different language? Yeah. And that's what a chief data officer might look at, rather than a risk officer who says, we can't give them the name. Well, we're not going to use the name. We're not going to use any of that. We've got 10,000 people that ticked a box that says French is their first language. So let's look at that. So yeah, that's my difference. There's the risk angle, lockdown. Then there's this other angle, wherever it sits, which is how can you use the data to drive your services? And
from the COOs, I'm curious to think, do you think there's a potential tension there, and how would you manage that within your organizations?
So if I play that first, no, I don't think there is a tension. I mean, the way I was describing it was that unless you have the compliance angle or the you have the correct data managed in the correct way, safely looked after, then you can't really begin to leverage it anyway. There's different levels. There's the compliance aspect, which has to be done. You've got to make sure that the quality of your data is such and it's safe, secure, and that you have consent from clients to be able to use it. Once you've done all of that, that's when you can then really view it as an asset, rather in some respects, rather than a liability, and begin to kind of use it. And it's I think that the example that Roy gave is a great example of just the power of the insight you can get to start building your propositions.
Thanks, Paul. Anything to add?
Yeah, from my side, I think there can be tension there if the culture around this is not right at the outset. So, if it's seen that the chief risk officer or compliance or the likes are business prevention, then clearly there's going to be tension, because the first line of the front office will think they're just there to say no. And quite often that's the early start of the journey, right? It is that regulatory imperative. What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? But when you mature beyond that to let's work together and say, what is the right thing to do to meet that regulatory requirement, but also the right thing for the business and the clients, you do move beyond that, and you start to move into space of where do our commercial drivers and our compliance and regulatory requirements match. So stop thinking about what we can't do, start viewing this data as an asset, as we've said a number of times, and then you start to get into the space of what can we do in the right way. So that's quite a different mindset and culture to the early stages of that journey. And so the challenge is, you know, if we're stuck in that early stage, move beyond that, because this is the way our industry is, and for good reason. You know, these regulations are there to protect the industry, to protect the firms, protect the clients. But if we find a way through that, there is absolutely something that is for the common good. So it's imperative to move beyond that stage and work hand in glove to find a way forward.
I think Paul makes a really good point, and you know, I thought he made it well, that you know, the regulation and the compliance and second line, it really shouldn't be there as a reason to not be able to use that data. I think that the you know, if you think about GDPR or the role of the data protection officer or anything else, it's not designed to say you can't use data. All it's saying is make sure that clients are aware that you've got the data and what have you. And it's quite interesting, because we talked on one of our previous calls about the concept of open finance. Now, you know, that's behind open banking. So in the banking environment, we've got the concept of open banking, where the regulator is encouraging firms to make that data available more widely. And actually what it's doing is turning it on its head a bit, because it's saying actually that becomes the data should be an asset for the individual. So if the individual says, well, I want to get a single view of all of my holdings across, regardless of which firm I hold it with, they're saying, well, you should, as a client, you should be able to do that. Well, once you've then got that as part of your mindset and proposition, you know, then I think you can really start making quite meaningful changes to propositions that will be of real value to clients. So, you know, data, I think, shouldn't be seen as something to be scared of. It should be seen as something that, you know, over time can help customers, clients, you know, get a more efficient and better service.
I would add just on that, we often, when we look at data, we often look at the big tech companies out there and the data that they've got. I think one of the key strengths of something like the UK wealth management business is the relationships that you've had over time and how secure that relationship has been, and that you have never misused that data that you've always had, even before the regulations were in place. So now the regulations are in place, yes, we're regulated, but I think there's some power in that as well. It is that why have we got the data? If you can get over the why you've got the data and why it is useful for the end customer, then you've knocked off all of their concerns, I think, about why have they got this on me, why are they using this data. I think that is quite powerful, and maybe that's something that you guys could play on, is that you've always had those relationships. They've always been secure. You just are doing something different with the data from now on.
Yeah, interesting. And sort of staying on that theme, how do you find that staff respond to this topic? Do you see sort of resistance because they see like AI as a threat to personal relationships with clients, or do they welcome it because they feel it improves the client experience? Or I suppose it's going to be a combination of the two. Dan?
I'll pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned there. So AI is a whole other subject matter, I guess, altogether, and a whole different capability. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I can see in the wealth management industry that they will be, you know, they won't necessarily be one of the first adopters of AI. You know, that's quite useful if you've got very high volumes of predictive behaviours, but we're still very much an industry that's regulated based on personal responsibility for the advice and the service that we provide. Going back to how staff think about it, I mean, this might be a little bit contentious, but I think that we struggle to have people with the capability to really understand the value of data and how it can be used. I think it will be a new and emerging skill set. I think there are probably some industries like retailers who probably have been used to working with large amounts of big data to start informing their strategy and their sales strategy and how they can improve their marketing as a result of it. I think that for a lot of staff in our sector, maybe they'd be more concerned with the strategy of investing, about the regulation, about the environment we're in, and we're less probably marketing driven organizations when it comes to strategic marketing. So I think that's a capability that firms will grow over time. I have no doubt there's some firms out there who are probably better at it than others, but I see a need for us to continue to build and invest in people who have this sort of strength.
So a bit of a skills shortage there from your point of view at the moment.
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, so I think the view from the staff is probably a mixed bag, depending on, to a degree, where you are in this segment, in the wealth segment. So if you are at the lower end of the range, then there's potentially a fear that data and data analytics is being used to replace. How do we go down the robo advice? Is my position justified? But if you can move beyond that to data analytics to enhance and support, you can get a different outcome. So again, I think that's the journey that we've got to take our people through over the coming years. It doesn't need to be an either or, and sometimes the use cases to date have been either or, where it is replaced by robo advice, the personal sales force. But actually, there's with the long-standing deep relationships that our teams have with our clients, there is a belief that we understand our clients best and that you couldn't automate that. But when you start to get into CRM platforms that run algorithms that start to throw out opportunities, this is not about replacing that knowledge. It's about adding on to that. And so you can start to see better opportunities, stronger pipeline, increased conversions with just the odd little tips and hints here and there, things that are thrown in front of the banker to consider. You can get a different outcome. So once you move into that space, it takes that threat away and it starts to enhance and support the relationship. So it's effective use of data analytics to support a personal touch relationship as opposed to replace it. It's certainly the direction that I would want to take our firm in.
And what about on the client side and the sort of the privacy aspect? Do you ever get pushback from clients around, this information that's being captured about them sort of being mirrored back at them? I mean, I know we all have this experience with various firms that we deal with online where we think, oh, they know a little bit too much. And sure, you've agreed to it, of course, but it doesn't stop that sort of the creepy factor, if you like. Is that something that comes up at all?
For us, not to date, because we've not been leveraging it to the extent that we possibly could.
Sure.
But there should be a concern there, and with that again, with the role of the chief data officer, that's intended to guide us through this. So it's not absolutely leveraging every single thing that we possibly could. The Amazon, these are books that we think you'd like approach, but actually very selective, very solutions oriented, and then using that as a prompt for the banker to go in on a personal basis and really understand and match that need, as opposed to just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. So we've not had it yet because we've used it prudently, but that's exactly why we need to move and proceed with caution just now through this type of role to guide us on the way forward.
If I can jump in on that, I think that, again, in the earlier discussion, we said that relationship has been very much transaction-led relationship at the moment, but the key word being relationship in UK wealth. So as you move to data-driven, you should not forget the word relationship at the end, because that's the key difference that you've got. Yeah, there's all of those firms that blast stuff at you, but you don't have a relationship with them. So how do you keep that relationship, even though you're using this data, is the really important aspect, I think, for you guys to think about. And is again the differentiator between why they would do business with you and not with somebody else.
I mean, just building on that, I would say that the thing that sometimes, I think clients with their relationship with their wealth manager or their bank is that they trust you with lots of quite important and personal information, and that's almost a given that you're going to look after that and they trust you to deal with it appropriately. And I think if anything, they want you to communicate with them. They want you to know them. They want you to be able to tell them pertinent information. I think where firms might get into a bit of hot water is if they're seen to, I think as Paul was alluding to, almost use that data inappropriately, or you know, prove that they don't really know them. You know, some spurious marketing shot to somebody, and it proves that they don't really understand them, or they don't reflect the fact that, in fact, they spoke to them a couple of days ago about an issue, and then somebody else in the firm doesn't know it. So I think that we have a privileged position where clients are more than happy to share all sorts of data with us, but you know, with that comes a degree of responsibility about how you use it.
And what do you see as your main sort of, I guess, data needs going into the future? And that could be on like the client side, or maybe Roy, you could pick up what you're seeing on the sort of markets data side. What are some of the key needs and sort of holes there?
So if I start, I think the guys mentioned it earlier. I think you've got themes that the market goes through. So big theme at the moment is ESG data. Yeah. So anything around ESG, because there's an interest in it. You can pull that out to cryptocurrency. You can pull it out to, I think, tax information is becoming more important as well. So that's sort of on the information side. I don't know what the guys are seeing locally, but that's what I'm seeing across Europe. And it's, at the moment, I think there is data, but there is possibly a lack of standardization around that data. So that's something we're trying to help with, is, you know, what's the right data set to use in the right instance is still the most important thing. But those are the three themes that we're seeing across Europe.
And when you say the standardization side, do you mean specifically ESG or?
Specifically around ESG, yeah. It's what is termed as ethical, what is the social, what's the governance bit, yeah. You can take all sorts of figures from all sorts of places, but until we've got EU action plan data in place and reported properly, right, there's not many standards out there. So you can take some benchmarks and things to look at, but I think that's a key challenge in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, I think somebody said in like a previous session that you know, the governance data that's out there is pretty good. It's more the E and the S that are problematic. Paul, how about you? What are your data needs?
Yeah, so similar on ESG, that's definitely a topical theme at the moment that we're getting much more interest in, and it's one of those topics that is very difficult to analyze your existing book of clients and data and think, who is this going to work for? So right now we've been reactive to, you know, website click-throughs, email click-throughs, and dealing with it that way. But there's definitely much more we can do on analyzing our client book to say, like, how do we increase that? How do we increase the interest and widen it? We've got a specific challenge in my firm just now based on the client demographic. So we have a large proportion of our client book that are moving to the, you know, the latter stages, thinking about estate distribution, thinking about their beneficiaries and so on. And as I tussle with this ESG challenge, that may be of some interest to our existing client. How much interest will that be to their beneficiaries? And how do we help them on that distribution journey, supporting the beneficiaries, which then changes the dynamic of the relationship altogether. So it's how do we use our current knowledge of the relationship with some of those data-driven points that we can access to deal with the topical for today's client and tomorrow's client.
Thanks, Paul. How about you, Dan? Any sort of specific data needs that are coming up for you?
Yeah, I think I could probably break them down into three areas. So the first one I think Roy touched on is around how do we use data to give clients confidence that we're being very transparent, open, honest, and make information around their portfolios or their investments clear and understandable and what have you. So it's around clarity and presenting that data in a way that people can rely on and trust, and you know, the concept of, you know, having a set of rules around how you define ESG, for example, I think is one good example. And then the second part is how do we use data and digital to make the whole relationship between a customer and their wealth manager more efficient and more seamless and reduce friction. So the concept of that would be how do we stop customers having to complete the same data information on forms 15 times, because we already know that data, and how do you recycle and use that data so it works for the efficiency of clients. And then the third bit is the thing around knowing your customer and making sure that you use it to develop propositions which really suit their needs and you know, are meeting their requirements. So when I think about a business, I tend to put it into those three buckets.
Thanks. We've had a question through from the audience, which I think we can probably logically address now. So they've asked, do the panelists find the increasing cost of sourcing research data, such as ESG and security pricing data, is eventually likely to limit the level of usage available to end clients and end client reporting? Paul, did you want to pick up on that?
So I don't see it that way at the moment. You know, our task is to bring the best of that research to our clients on an internal and external basis. There are MiFID II requirements around this, but absolutely we should not limit the quality of research that we're capturing and sharing based on cost. So it's getting that balance right, but it's to get the right quality and derive the right outcome. So currently, no, that's not limiting our approach.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Dan?
Similarly, I mean, when we went through MiFID II, you know, there were increased requirements to gather new data sources, and you know, there is a cost to it. But at the token, you know, at the same token, you've got to look at what the regulation was trying to achieve. Go, is it the right thing that you are able to have this information to hand and that you can replay it to clients? And unfortunately, it feels to me that that's the cost of doing business and the cost of providing a good service to your clients. You know, what's interesting in making sure that there is a competitive and market out there for this sort of data, that we have providers of this sort of data who are providing a good service, and the challenge is also making sure that, you know, that's equitably shared across all of the market that's being offered to. So I think a very open and transparent marketplace for these data services, I think, is really important.
And if I can, because we're a data provider, if I can give an example, and I think it is that equitable. There is cost in this data. I think it's around, again, if you go back to the chief data officer role, it's the way they look at data, and they look at it, okay, where could we reuse data? Where could it be reused, rather than how can I pay as little as possible, right, for my small niche? And when you go in with that attitude, that open attitude, I'll give an example. Swiss customer, obviously, Swiss wealth customer, who asked us if they could use their data that they already use in their security master file for data science. And it just so happened that they were going to sit these data scientists in Luxembourg for some reason. Yeah. So completely different use of the data, but that customer already had an enterprise-wide license. Yeah. So we said, yeah, of course you can use the data. You've got an enterprise-wide data license for that piece of data, whether you use it in Luxembourg or Switzerland, as long as it's for the, you know, for the use of wealth management, it's okay. So I don't think it has to necessarily impact the cost too much. I think you just need to think about it, and that is again where maybe there is a need for somebody looking cross-function to think, if we've got this data, how can we reuse it in different parts of the business, rather than buying it in 5 times in 5 different areas. I think that can actually end up lowering costs rather than increasing costs.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Roy. And so are you getting a lot of, do you get a lot of pushback on the cost front, you know, as someone on the sell side?
Obviously, yeah, you get pushback on cost because people look at their budget, yeah, and they look at their budget and what can we spend on. But again, that's maybe there are more budgets than just that one that you need to look at. Maybe it's an umbrella, and I think this is the chief data officer role. It's that umbrella view of costs and reuse that really becomes important, rather than just a very narrow use of something like a data license for ESG.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in our sector, isn't it? Because I think, you know, when you look at CDOs and other sectors are primarily looking at it from like the information that's held about the customer, and then in wealth management we obviously have the market data side as well. So it would be interesting to sort of think about, you know, what this role would look like in our industry.
Yeah.
One other thing to add to that, Alex, sorry
Yeah,
to cut across, where you talked about the client side of things and the market data, and then there's also the product data. And, you know, with our product governance frameworks that we have in place, we've got a lot of data on each of our products, how they're used, the target market, negative target market. So you've got this overlay of what the client data is telling us, what the market data is telling us, and what our own product data is telling us, that I think is a very useful lens as well.
Yeah, and I think we chatted about this. I wrote down, if you were looking at somebody for this sort of role, I think it's open-minded view of data. Yeah, I think it's that open mind to, there will be some smaller wealth managers who need to find a niche, a niche in the marketplace, using what products have you got that are successful, what's the market doing, what's our customer base look like. And you need somebody who can look at all three of those things in a very open-minded way and think about playing with some of those niches and presenting those niches to the C-suite and say, you know, which of these makes sense, but with some data backing it up on those three elements.
Interesting.
Just picking up on a point that Paul made, that whole concept of target market, that there is a challenge in our industry. We work, you know, generally we work with, you know, multiple manufacturers of business, and ultimately they all have a part to play in, you know, providing products and services to the end client, the ultimate end client. But there aren't really mechanisms in place of making sure there's a clear and transparent view of that client data across, you know, the product manufacturers, the distributors, platforms, and what have you, and getting that all joined up. I think that increasingly will become a feature as we move forward, which is how is data shared amongst organizations.
Yeah, and I think that's to your point of where does open finance and open banking come in, and working together as a group, you know, and an organization. And I think, again, that's where Chief Data Officer, if it's a role, really helps, because those guys, you know, on this call today, we've got lots of COOs because you guys are talking, yeah. So there's a COO community. There's also a CDO community out there as well. Go to events, go to speak to each other, and just speak in a different way, and we'll address some of those more industry-wide topics about how can we progress, how can we share information in an open way but a secure way.
Yeah, and I think another good point would be, you know, how you guys think sort of data innovation, I know this is a little bit more general, but can kind of attract new user groups to UK wealth management. Obviously, both of your firms deal with, you know, high net worth, ultra high net worth clients, but do you think there's scope for innovation in terms of bringing more people into the fold and sort of closing the advice gap and that kind of thing?
From my side, most definitely, yeah. We've had a tendency to think that we already have the skills that we require within the business to grow and to evolve, but we're moving into, you know, for us, uncharted territory here. We've got to be able to bring in the skill set that we require to support the C-suite, to support the management of the business, and to innovate in a safe way. So absolutely, we need to bring in external support and expertise in this area.
I suppose that, Alex, from my point of view, if you think about millennials, and even worse than that, Generation Z, you know, they have a completely different view of the world and how they expect to access services, and how they expect, and again, they expect everything to be seamless, online, on an app, etc., etc. So, you know, I think if you try and wind the clock forward 20, 30 years time, when you're putting significant wealth in the hand of these individuals, what are their requirements going to be? It will be very different to what it is today.
I think we're probably just about ready to wrap up, but if you do have any final questions, please do pop them in the Q&A and we'll address them. But just to wrap up, I thought it might be interesting to hear from you, you know, whether each of you think that your firm will have a chief data officer role, say within 5 years. Paul?
Yeah, I think we will. I mentioned to you about the challenge we've got on our client demographic and addressing that next generation issue that Dan just mentioned. I think we would be fooling ourselves if we thought we could do it with our existing skill set, our existing management and corporate structure. And so only having the right role, the right skills and expertise to guide us through this in a compliant way that meets the business imperative and that supports our client needs, will we be able to address that critical business challenge that we've got. So, you know, in that 5-year timeframe, yes, I do believe we will have the need for the CDO, and I'm not sure where they'll sit in the organisation, but it has to be, you know, management C-suite to be able to get the right focus on addressing this challenge. Brilliant, thanks, Dan.
Well, as a good journalist, what you try and do is you try and get guests that, you know, disagree. So I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree with Paul on the basis of I mean, as I opened up with, I think data is hugely important to firms, but trying to pigeonhole it into one role and you know, it's so broad and so far reaching. I think what you need is you need all of your senior managers to understand the value of data, and I think you should more try and gear them into the particular roles and organisation that we have today, from, you know, your chief marketing officer having a part for it, the COO, the heads of distribution, you know, your head of investment management. I think everybody needs to be alive to data, and you do need a data strategy, but it's so wide ranging from, you know, the supply of data providers to your kind of customer strategy to your compliance strategy. I just think that in a way it becomes that in the future may become, you know, the new CEO almost.
Yeah. How about you, Roy? Do you think that this is something we'll see more of in the wealth management sector in the coming years?
I think it's split. You know, I think in the bigger companies, you'll probably see this role because it'll be copied from investment management or investment banking, where it's a role at the moment. So I think you will. I think in smaller organizations, they tend to agree with Dan. This is something that your whole C-suite needs to worry about and needs to, I think, those 3 data elements we mentioned, external, internal, your product side, and come up with a strategy based on that. I think it was interesting, the niche and the demographic. Yeah. And again, I think this is where if you go in with an open mind, there are lots of retired people at the moment, right, who have actually that millennial Generation Z way of thinking as well. They're always on their mobile phones. They're investing in the latest thing that they see on some sort of social media platform. Yeah, you could experiment with those guys to start with, right? So again, it's that open-mindedness that I think we just need to put across the whole of the organization.
Brilliant. Lots to think about. Hey, thank you so much for your time, everyone, and especially to Six for assisting us in putting on this event. And also thank you to all the people who took the time to attend.